So this morning, I've got a title to a sermon, Learning Through a Trial. Okay. And I have the concept is placing your heart and mind in line with the will of God and trusting that He will lead us where we should go, even if we don't like where that might be. Now, how many of you have been in church for a while? Now, there used to be an old position that I'm going to say is a wrong position. That is, if you're going through a trial, that's probably because you deserve it. And if you're going through a trial that you deserve to go through, you should just buckle up and take it. And I'm going to say, though there may be some truth some of the time to that, that may not be a predominantly true time. There are trials that God may have in store for us that are designed for something to do for us. And we need to know that. Not every trial that we are subjected to is because we're dumb or because we are deserving of punishment. Some trials we go through are intended to do something for us in a positive way. So I'm wanting to throw that out to you this morning. Again, some trials are results of bad decisions. Some trials are our fault, but not all trials are our fault. You kind of have to hear that. All right. How many think a lot about Paul and his ministry? Paul has wrote a collection of letters to the churches while he was incarcerated. One of his later works is this last letter to the church in Corinth. And towards the end of this, he goes into this place. Now, this slide is more of a placeholder. Most of this slide has little to do with the subject of this morning's message, but I just want to throw it out there because the next part of it is relevant. Boasting is necessary. It is not profitable, but I will move on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who was caught up in the third heavens 14 years ago. Whether he was in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows. I know that this man, whether in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows. Whether he was caught up into paradise, he heard inexpressible words which a man is not allowed to speak. I will boast about this person, but not about myself, except in my weakness. For if I want to boast, I will not be a fool, because I'm willing to be telling the truth. I will spare you so that no one can credit me with something beyond what he sees in me or hears in me. So he's throwing this out, and he's like, look, I'm not going to take credit for this other person's vision, and I don't want you to think that it is my vision. And so I want you to be aware of that. This is not my vision. But then he says, I want you to think of me for what you see in me. And that's how he ends that. I want you that I cannot take credit of something beyond what he sees in me or hears from me. Now, it's kind of interesting because he doesn't name this other person. Now, by the description of this text, we could guess of a couple people in the first century church that it could be. But I don't know if that's relevant to this morning's message. He continues on, especially because of these extraordinary revelations, therefore, so that I would not exalt myself, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, so that I would not exalt myself. Concerning this, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Therefore I will gladly boast all the more about my weakness, so that Christ's power may reside in me. So I take pleasure in weakness, insults, catastrophes, persecutions, and pressures because of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, if we just take a moment to take that paragraph of information and just let it manifest itself in us, we can glean out of this a lot of different things. One is, Paul had ailments. Do you recognize that in this passage? What kind of ailment did Paul have? We don't know. But he just called it a thorn in the flesh, thorn in the side. So let's take a moment to speculate. What kind of thorns in this side could I experience? On this side. What's over here? Gallstones, gallbladder. I wonder where you got that idea from.
I saw
Okay. What else? Anything else over here? Is your liver on the right side? I thought your liver was on the right side. Okay, liver's on the right side. What else is over here or here? Appendix? Yep. Okay. Spleen on your left. She's getting over there. All right. We're still on the right side. You got lungs up here, a little higher. You got intestines that do this S thing all the way through. Yep. I bet you she did. All right, how about this side? You said spleen. I remember you saying spleen. What's on this side? Ulcers. Can't you have ulcers on this side too? Pretty sure you can. Okay. Yeah, because in... So it's a significant ulcer injury. Okay, what else is over here? Okay. Pancreas. Heart's up here. Yep. Yep, you got things down here if you're female. Of course, Paul wouldn't have those. But women will.
Yeah.
You know, women will, absolutely. And we'll make this gender neutral.
Yeah.
Okay? So obviously we said that there's a lot of things that Paul could have a problem with. And how many times did he ask God to take away his infirmity? 3 times. 3 times. So would you say Paul's a slow learner because he kept asking? No, you wouldn't. But he didn't get an answer the first 2 times. He didn't get an answer until after the 3rd time. Okay? Absolutely. With prayer requests? Yep. Sometimes praying for other people is a lifelong journey. But in verse 9, Paul gets an answer from the Lord of his prayer request. And that answer is, my grace is sufficient for you. That's not a yes. That's not a no. It's something else. My grace is sufficient for you. For power is perfected in your weakness. Now this is interesting because Paul starts off and says, so that I would not exalt myself in verse 7. So that I would not, if sometimes when God is blessing us, we feel great about it, and we can almost be kind of arrogant about God's blessings in us, right? And Paul says, so that I would not think highly of myself, this happened to me. So this is God putting me in my place. Now this is a man that was bit by a poisonous snake and shook that snake off into the fire and did not have any side effects of poison. Yeah, and everyone's like, that's why he's a prisoner. That's why he's worthy of death. And he's not dying. Well, I think the thorn in the flesh is the constant torment of pain that he is experiencing. And that torment of pain is telling him things that he doesn't want to hear. Like, you are unworthy. That's the message. You are unworthy to be healed. You are unworthy to be touched by God. You are unworthy. And Paul, so that he would not boast, would not exalt himself, found himself in this place. So when God is going to put you through a trial that you may not deserve to go through, ask yourself, Lord, what can I learn? What can I come away with through this experience? Because obviously, most of us, when we're thrown into a trial, the last thing we want to do is go through it. And the first thing we want to do is have it over with as soon as possible, right? It is our nature to not go through anything that's uncomfortable, painful. We just don't want to do it. We want to get to that next spot in our journey quickly. But here, God is telling Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. So I want you to write that down, if you've got notes to write that down, or remember it, that my grace is sufficient for you. As Paul looks at this in his life and is trying to encourage others who may go through a struggle, he went through a struggle, and he didn't want to boast about God answering all his prayers the way he wanted them to. Because he understood that God doesn't necessarily answer all prayers. Today, I'm less able to tell you why God chooses to answer some prayers with a yes and some prayers with a no and other prayers with a maybe. I have less of an idea when God decides to do that than I used to. I used to have a formula that I could tell you, and I felt confident, and I know that that is not the way it works. This is a passage that we've talked about not terribly long ago. Luke chapter 4, Jesus is, excuse me. Jesus has returned home to Nazareth. He's just got done speaking at the temple. He read the prophecy about the Messiah. And the crowd says in verse 24, he also said, I assure you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. But I say to you, there were certain men and widows of Israel in Elijah's day, when the sky was shut up for 3.5 years, while a great famine came over the land, yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in Sidon, which is in the land of Philistine. And the prophet Elisha's time, there were many in Israel who had serious skin diseases, yet not one of them was healed, only Naaman the Syrian. When they heard this, everyone in the synagogues was enraged. They got up, drove him out of town, and brought him to the edge of the hill that their town was built on, intending to hurl him over the cliff. But he passed right through the crowd and went on his way. Now, when I read this passage, Jesus says There was times in the past that God passed over the children of Israel and gave a blessing to somebody unworthy. This is what Jesus is showing examples of. A Philistine widow, when there was plenty of widows in Israel. And a leper from Syria, a commander of the enemy's army, was healed from leprosy when yet there were many lepers in Israel. Now, if you're a Jew, these are mean words. These are nasty words. How dare you tell us that we're unworthy of being healed? But Jesus is not saying that you're unworthy. He's saying that there are times that the grace of God is given to others. Now, if you admit at times in our life, we can be envious people, right? And somebody gets a blessing and we can be jealous. Somebody can be driving a brand new car and we can like, I deserve a new car. Somebody can get a brand new tractor and think, well, I wish I had a new tractor. You just don't want the tractor payments. We can become envious of somebody else's blessing sometimes. And so that's a feeling that we have to watch in us, that we do not become envious. Because these people were ready to push Jesus off a cliff for merely mentioning that God will bless somebody that's not you. And I say you meaning the chosen church or the chosen group of people. These are examples of things that we would struggle with. And of course, he slipped away before they accomplished their task. A couple pages later, we see that the disciples are on a boat with Jesus. One day, he and his disciples got into a boat. He told them, let's cross over to the other side of the lake. So they set out, and as they were sailing, he fell asleep. Then a fierce windstorm came down on the lake. They were being swamped and were in danger. They came and woke him up. Master, Master, we're going to die. Now, I don't know about you, but those are kind of serious words. And you see the explanation point, which means that they were probably yelling. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waves. So they ceased. And there was calm. He said to them, where is your faith? Okay, now Jesus was known to say mean things to the Pharisees, right? He called them brood of vipers, and he talked bad about them. And he would tell people, your faith, your righteousness must exceed that of a Pharisee to enter the kingdom. He laid it out straight and simple. This is the way it is. Jesus looked at his disciples repeatedly and said, where is your faith? Now, on the outside, you have to ask yourself, what faith are you talking about? I'm on the boat with you, right? I believe in you. I'm following you wherever you go. But he's like, but you don't trust me. You don't trust that you're not in harm's way. You don't trust me that you're not in harm's way. We're in the middle of a storm and you are panicking. And he stands up and says, ha! And the wind stops, sea calms down. And notice, they were fearful and amazed, asked one another, who can this be? He commands even the winds and the waves, and they obey him. I think they might have been more scared after the storm. It's like, what did we just witness? Think about it for a minute. This man is more than a guy that multiplies bread at the dinner table and he feeds people. He's got a lot more to offer than what we think. This is a shocker to those on the boat. We're going to spend a few minutes in Daniel. I probably am not going to read much of it because you guys have heard many stories about Daniel. Have you not? So we can talk about Daniel in contextual content, so we won't necessarily talk about. But in Daniel chapter 3, if you brought your Bibles, you can look it up. You don't have to. King makes a huge idol, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, and he puts it out in the plains outside his kingdom. And he wants people to worship this crafted statue. And the people are given this edict. When you hear the music, bow down and worship. And they're out there, and an entourage is out there, and they hear the music, and everyone falls. Except a couple Jewish boys. And the crowd, some of the officials are taking notes, write down these officials' names, and come tell the king. Somebody isn't doing what you told them to do. Somebody isn't bowing down and worshiping this creation of yours. Well, who in the world is that? So 3 Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Huh? Really? Well, let's bring them in here. Go get those boys. We'll correct this thing immediately. And those who do not worship will be burned to death. That's also in the edict. So go get those boys. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show up. I'm supposed to have a slide before this. All right. Apparently I don't. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show up and they say, Nebuchadnezzar, don't take this wrong, but we serve a God that we can't allow, that doesn't allow us to worship images. And just so you know, if he wanted to save us from you, he would. But even if he doesn't, we will not bow down and worship your idols. Now think about that for a minute. That's the response that they gave the king. We don't want you to take this the wrong way, but our God doesn't let us do this. Nebuchadnezzar is getting furious with him. You will not worship my image that I have created? He commanded them to heat the furnace 7 times the normal temperature. He commanded his guards to grab them, unbind them, and throw them into the furnace. They were bound so viciously that the soldiers who threw them into the furnace died from being burned as they opened up the doors and the flames came out and hit the soldiers that were throwing them in. Now, I really don't want this to be about the miraculous salvation of the Jews, those 3 boys. I want this to be about their decision. Now, walk with me through this logic. We're going to walk through this logic. Why were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Babylon? Why were they in Babylon? They were captured. Okay? They were captured when? When were they captured? When Jerusalem and Judah fell to Nebuchadnezzar, all right? Basically, book of Jeremiah. Why did God allow Judah and Jerusalem to fall to the Babylonians? Idol worship was a big one. What else? Because God's people had become quite pagan. God's people weren't trusting in God. They were trusting in themselves and their traditions and their practices and doing what was right in their own eyes. So God grabbed a hold of the country and carried it off into slavery. While in slavery, 3 Jewish boys and Daniel kind of decided to get together and decided that they would not be like they were in the homeland. Maybe they were homesick. I would bet they were. Maybe they missed being around mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, who now may be dead because of the but these guys, they're like, there's some things worth dying for. And, my God took us away from our land. My God put us here to punish us. It is time that we get our act together. It is time that we get our act together. We're not going to worship your idol. Now, obviously, the conclusion to the story is amazing, wonderful, but that's not what this morning is about. This morning is about the decision. We are not going to be the way we used to be. We're going to be the way God wants us to be, even at the threat of death. Even at the threat of death. Shadrach, Meshach, we don't need to give you an answer. If our God exists, he can rescue us. We talked about that. But we're not going to worship your idol. Now that was early in the days of captivity. Much later, maybe 50, 60 years later, we get this story. Daniel is an old guy. He has seen the hands of the kingdom shift a couple of times. Nebuchadnezzar's gone. Belshazzar's gone. Some guy, Darius, showed up just the day before, conquered the empire, killed Belshazzar, and now Daniel is the head. Number 2 guy underneath Darius. People want to plot to climb up the corporate ladder to get to where Daniel is. So they're like, well, let's find a way to do this. Daniel's a man of good reputation. They can't fight his character. They can't fight he doesn't take bribes. He is a clean kind of guy. Well, let's go after him because of his God. We know that he serves his God. Let's get the king to sign an edict that says if anybody worships a god or goes to anybody other than the king for the next 30 days will be thrown to the lion's den. So they approach the king and get him to sign off on this order. Darius, that is, not Nebuchadnezzar. And Darius signs it off thinking, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm the head man around here. Let's sign his name to it. And then after they sign it, Daniel is told, the king issued an edict that nobody can pray to another god or seek that of another person other than the king. So what does Daniel do? He does what he always does. He goes into his room where the windows are wide open, facing Jerusalem, and he knows people are watching. And he prays to his God. Well, the word gets back to the king, and the king likes Daniel. Darius likes Daniel. He's like, what have I done? But he has to throw him into the lion's den. And Darius is furious with himself. He's trying to figure out a loophole in the law, but there is no loophole because he signed the law. And Darius is like, oh gosh, Daniel, I hope your God can help you out here, man. I really do. But he throws him into the lion's den for one day. Because Daniel did worship his God with the windows open. Are we capable of making those decisions to do the right thing in the face of persecution? Are we capable of making the hard decisions when there are going to be negative consequences culturally? Are we capable of being Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's and the Daniel saying, you know, just not worth it. I know what God's judgment looks like. And yeah, you have the power to throw me in the lion's den, or you have the power to throw me in the fiery furnace. It's all right. No big deal. Because I'm right with God. And that's what's important. So they threw him in the lion's den because the king couldn't find a way to rescue him. The last passage that we're going to cover this morning is this little itty-bitty passage after Jesus and Peter have this conversation about Peter feeding Jesus' sheep. Peter is going to be appointed the head of the church, the senior apostle. You be the man. I'm going home to be with my Father. Don't worry, I got plans to send you a comforter, but you be the man. And this is how the conversation ends up. Feed my sheep. But then verse 18 kicks in. Verse 18. I assure you, when you were young, you would tie your belt and walk wherever you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will tie you and carry you where you do not want to go. He said this to signify what kind of death would glorify God. After saying this, he told them, follow me. Now, Peter, just looking around, he's like, what about him? Referring to the author of this book, which we give credit to the author of this book as being John, the apostle, son of Zebedee, the one whom Jesus loved according to the author of John. And Jesus says to Peter, if I want him to remain until I come, what is it to you? As for you, follow me. Don't worry about somebody else. Don't worry about somebody else. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that John got it easy. You know, we can tell you all about John's trials, even though he's the only one that died of old age. He was boiled in oil, exiled on the land of Patmos, broke rock for the fun of breaking rocks. And he couldn't skip them on the lake, couldn't skip them on the sea, because he was in chains. That's what John ended up with. But he told Peter, what is it to you? You follow me. So when you enter into a trial in your life, set your heart and mind in line with the will of God. Okay, Lord, if I am going through this because I've done something wrong, teach me. If I'm going through this because I haven't done something wrong, teach me. Lord, whatever it is that you wish me to learn, open my heart and mind so that I may learn what you want of me. If you want to teach me patience, Lord, oh God, let me be a quick student. Right? That's the way we pray. Lord, give me patience. Give it to me now. Let us tackle every trial placed in front of us with the heart that we want God to teach us. And if you deserve to be there, there's still a lesson of wisdom that can be learned through that experience. Receive that lesson with open heart, open eyes, and a fully appreciative mind. Let us stand and close in prayer.